Welcome to Rising Up for Justice, a special weekly series presented by Rising Up with Sonali, an independently produced subscriber-supported program syndicated to radio stations, FreeSpeechTV, and podcast platforms. I'm SonaliKolhatkar, host and executive producer. Our nation and our world are overrun by billionaires and bigots, but they are few and we are many. On this series, exclusive to subscribers of Rising Up with Sonali and viewers of Free Speech TV, we'll hear from the organizers in the movements for social justice and dig into the nuts and bolts of values, strategies, tactics, narratives, and building power. This week on Rising Up for Justice, MessiahRamkissoon joins me. He serves as Deputy Executive Director at YouthJustice Network, a nonprofit supporting 16 to 24-year-olds affected by Rikers Island and other detention facilities. Welcome to the program, Messiah.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So I'm in Southern California on the opposite end of the country as you. You're in New York. For those of us who are outside New York, Rikers Island is notorious. It is basically the largest jail in New York City. And I understand is going to be, at least planned to be, closed by next year. Tell me about YouthJustice Network and its relationship to those people who have been held at Rikers Island.
Sure. So YouthJustice Network, we were actually founded on Rikers Island 35 years ago under the name Friends of Island Academy. At that time, you had an overflowing jail of teenagers and young adults who were inundating the facilities on Rikers Island. And I'm talking of age 16 to 21-year-olds. And these young people were being released and going home to the community. But there was nothing for them when they came home, right? There were no safety nets to support young people post-release. The services at that time, 35 years ago, for folks leaving incarceration were exclusive to adults. And so while young people were overpopulating the jail system within New York City, there was no intervention. And so they would come home and recidivate and come back to Rikers and get sentenced to face football numbers, unfortunately, or they would come home and unfortunately die in the streets. And so the principle of Rikers Island at that time, where the young people were mandated to go to school while on island, saw this perpetual cycle of young people coming out and recidivating or coming out dying and just going through horrible conditions because of the lack of resources and infrastructure around them, post-release and even pre-release. So that's when the principle branched out and started Friends of Island Academy, to be the first nonprofit organization to support young people coming home from Rikers Island and to make sure that they had that bridge to be able to get them not only off the island, as you have to take the bridge on and off of Rikers, but that bridge to keep them off the island as it relates to support and the team and the resources that are applicable to each young person based on their needs.
And so how do you summarize the work that YouthJustice Network does now? What are your organizational goals, both short-term and long-term?
Absolutely. On the more immediate, our goal is to make sure that every young person engaged is provided with the necessary tools to grow, thrive, and lead, and that we are intentional about our youth advocacy model, which we call an inside-out model, where we're meeting young people in the sensitive stages of their arrival to Rikers, of their arrival to any detention facility that we work out of, and that within the first 24 to 72 hours that we connect with them, that follow-through is just as important 24 to 72 hours as they hit the community. So I think that, for us, it's really about making sure that we treat this like a sense of urgency, that every young person we engage with, that we ensure that they are holistically met with not just a model, but a tailor-fitted approach that speaks to whatever their need is and also who they are, right? We take time to learn our young people. Many of our young people are generalized because of their association with Rikers, but each young person has their own individualized talent, own individualized passion, own family that they love and loves them. And so we have to make sure that we are giving our young people the respect that they need to really be able to activate and actualize what their innate gifts are, and not put them in a box to say, okay, this is the incarceration box, so the only thing that you can do is work a construction job when you come home. Meanwhile, young people may have interest in tech. They can go out and work IT. Young people may have interest in policy. They can go out and become an intern for their local senator or their local city councilman, right? And be able to get one foot into advocacy and be able to be policy advisors. So there's so much bandwidth and brilliance. So our immediate goal is to make sure every young person is provided with the tools to break out of those boxes. And we do that through our youth advocates. We are supporting young people in all 5 boroughs of New York City with only a team of 7 youth advocates. We have other advocates in departments to do other things, but those who are called the social workers, quote unquote, we call them youth advocates, right? And they're the people who are connecting with the youth, holding their hands. You may hear something like a young person needs a job, but it's not always that linear, right? Sometimes they need stabilized housing first. Sometimes they don't have identification. They may need help getting an ID, right? We have to go to the DMV with them and show them how to fill out the form to get the identification, right? We have to make sure we're teaching them how to tie a tie, how to interview. What do you say to an employer? We're building relationships with the employers to make sure that they understand the demographic as it relates to our young people, who they're working with, and that they're sensitive to some of these challenges while still preparing our young people to be able to meet the professional standards, right? So when they go into these interviews, it increases the likelihood of them getting the job based on the relationships that we've already curated. So I would say from a more long-term lens, we're looking to increase our bandwidth. We definitely need more staff as far as youth advocates to support more of the young people that we're meeting in the jails, in the streets, but also we're looking to franchise our model to other cities and areas to which they're looking to really create greater infrastructure around their work. And so one of the things that we revolutionized during the pandemic, because during COVID, the jails closed their doors to all service providers. So we knew this was the worst time for young people, especially the young people that we work with who are under-resourced. This was the worst time for them to not have access to their services. And so while no service providers could get into Rikers because of COVID, we said, let's be flexible. And so we literally shifted gears and created an innovation called Shifting Gears, which is a mobile bus that we purchased, wrapped it up with our logo, added an outreach team to it, a driver. And this bus now goes into a different borough each day of the week. And this outreach team engages with young people in these various neighborhoods in every borough of New York City and brings our services to the doorstep of the most challenged and under-supported neighborhoods. So we're now meeting people on the block where they are, as well as the jails. So we're looking to expand that to other cities throughout the United States at this current moment.
Right. So that's your sort of long-term goal. I wanted to pick up on one thing that I see on your website where you say that youth justice is racial justice. And I wonder if you can reflect on the intersection between our, some people call it our criminal injustice system and racism, where we just have disproportionate incarceration of people of color. And I imagine, of course, that is very much true on Rikers Island, where young people have been historically and even contemporarily incarcerated. They're largely kids of color, right?
Yeah. I think what we have to remember, it's important to know history. And so we must know that incarceration and the entire carceral system is really a segue from slavery. And so in the 13th Amendment here, it's in our Constitution that slavery is abolished with the exception of being punished for crime. So when you look at a place like Rikers Island, those are all people who've been punished for crimes, but have yet to be proven innocent or guilty, right? So to your point, there's a direct correlation between impoverished communities and incarceration, right? The desperate measures that someone goes to put a piece of food on the table to ensure that they have the support in place to provide for their children, the children who don't have the parental support because of the inequitable conditions their parents had to suffer and are now 16 years old and determining how they're going to eat tonight. So when you think about it from a racial lens, I think that it's an honest reflection. And as a society, we have to embrace our truths, right? I don't think that it's in any accident when you go to Rikers Island in a place like that, you see 95% young Black and Latino youth. And that we're constantly fighting this uphill battle, not just in Rikers, but I've worked in facilities in DC, in Baltimore, and other cities, and you see this identical norm becoming more and more mundane by the day. And as a society, we've accepted it as a norm, right? I've been to places such as Adirondack, New York, which is about 6 hours from New York City, about an hour below Canada. And the entire town thrives off the prison industrial complex, right? So it's really how they monetize as a town and survive. And they have a hub of countless prisons. But I went to one prison, just to answer your question. And as I was walking in, they were alerting me that these young men were all young Black kids from upstate New York, but not one person of color worked at the facility. So as they were incarcerated and detained, they had no one to look like them to even show them possibility that they could identify with, that they could find hope from and find hope in. So me traveling about 5 hours from New York City to go up there and going a second time was really to plant a seed, and to put these young men in the room and say, hey, what does governing our process look like once we leave here? And how will we utilizing this time here to really structure a plan? And what does it look like if we don't have that plan? What does it look like for us, but also our families? And how will we break generational curses during this time? So I think that, to your point, there's a direct correlation as it relates to racial injustice and what you saw on our website and the carceral system. And like I said, this is all a springboard from slavery. The slaves couldn't just be freed without society still having one foot in to be able to say, hey, we still need to be able to capitalize.
One of the things that your website also clarifies is that 100% of your staff at Youth Justice Network are people who are basically have gone through the system, are alumni of your program. And tell me why that is the case and why that's important.
Yeah, well, 100% of our staff, I would have to correct that. They're not alumni, but we are very intentional about hiring those with lived experience. There's a saying that says those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. We understand that our young people are sometimes more visual as opposed to audio learners, right? That when you're able to see someone who you can identify with, someone who's been there like you've been there, someone who looks like you to a great extent as it relates to culture, you find believability in process. Someone who's been there and said, I went through it and I was able to overcome and transition, and this is what process looked like for me. It adds more persuasive output and impact to the exchange. And so we are about being solution oriented, right? We're about making sure that we're doing what's needed to be transformative. And so with our young people, we want to be solution oriented as it relates to not just saying we got another grant, but saying that the people who are actually fulfilling the work and out there providing the support are very much credible as it relates to understanding who we work with, not being afraid of who we work with, having a specialized passion for the work, and wanting to see everyone we engage excel beyond immediate benchmarks. So we look at this from not just we got the job, but what does the career pathway look like, right? And making sure that everyone has the tools to empower that. So that's why it's important to hire folks with lived experience, because it's a depth that can't be replaced otherwise.
Messiah, does Youth Justice Network consider itself an abolitionist organization. I'm wondering if you can reflect on the kind of big picture around injustice and incarceration in the United States. You said our criminal justice system is an outcome of our, historical institution of slavery. And those people who worked hard to abolish that institution, leave behind a legacy. And today's abolitionists are looking to abolish prisons and policing as we know it. And is that something that your organization considers itself a part of?
Absolutely. I think that on our end, we've never taught reform. We've always taught abolish. But I want to take it a step deeper for you, that the process for that requires the impacted to take governance of their own process, right? So our approach is not just the resource, but it's the conversation, it's the mentorship for every young person. Because once young people understand structurally what this system is rooted in, historically, where it stems from, and how they fall in line with the entire game plan, that they themselves are able to take autonomy of their own process to say, I opt out. I opt out of being a slave. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to commit to learning, to add in some new talents to my bandwidth, and making sure that I'm making those mental deposits. And so where we intervene is really, what does that look like? Right? What are the steps? What are the supports? What are the conversations? Who are the mentors? What are our hours of operation? Are we meeting them where they are? And so I think that as you talk about abolishing, many organizations, the approach may be more linear, right? It may be more, hey, we can support you with the jobs and the resources. But I think for us holistically, twice a week, we're very intentional about making sure our mentors are at the table with young people, about making sure that young people are supported with the reflection and the understanding of systemically what this is, so they can do their own soul searching, coupled with the intervention that we provide, and ensure that even if they lose the job, they never take the chances or the risk of putting themselves in shackles again, or allowing the system to put them in shackles again. So I want to say that it's more mental than it is physical. And that's why we add the mentorship, the conversation, the holistic piece as it relates to how we engage in the triage. It's very critical to a young person's process.
And so give us an update on where Rikers Island stands, this specific institution that you are involved with. There is a plan to shut it down by next year. Your new mayor, Zoran Mamdani, is someone who has at one point called himself an abolitionist, although he sort of backtracked from that. But he's setting up this Department of Community Safety in New York City, and has talked about and has actually, I believe, begun to implement the process of shutting it down. Where's that going, and how does that, what impact will that have on the work of Youth Justice Network?
Good question. Well, right now, there is a fight to shut down Rikers. We're a part of that fight. There are many organizations in New York City, such as the Catal Center, Freedom Agenda New York, who really have been leading that fight. And we've been supporting them with that mission. Now, with that being said, in order for Rikers to close, you have to decrease population, right? Unfortunately, during our previous mayoral administration, the investment in over-policing didn't support the decreasing of the Rikers population. Actually, it reverted the process and caused an uptick in population. So where we are now is making sure that as a city, we're holistically looking at what are the needs, right, to get there. Are the service providers empowered? Are the mental health clinicians empowered? And I will say that over 62% of people currently housed on Rikers now are there with some type of mental health challenge, right? So Rikers is not equipped to support those human beings. Correctional officers are not trained to support. They're not clinicians. And so it's going to really require a lot of collaboration. Currently, they hired a new commissioner for the Department of Corrections to oversee Rikers. This is the first formerly incarcerated commissioner, a gentleman named Stanley Richards. I've worked with him, and I do believe that his heart is in a sincere place as it relates to Rikers and what's needed to shut down Rikers. And so, as it relates to Youth Justice Network, we follow the young people, and so wherever they transition to, we'll be connecting with them. We're not just in Rikers. Like I said, we have buses that go out to the boroughs each day of the week and meet our young people on the block as they transition to these borough jails that they are currently building. We'll be following them into these spaces and making sure that the support is still there, and because the support will still be needed. And so we're not just in Rikers, though. We're also in some of the ACS juvenile jails where our young people are in New York City. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
How do you respond to people who feel that, it doesn't matter the age of somebody, if they've quote unquote committed a crime, they should be serving a sentence? Somebody who's younger than 25 generally hasn't had the chance to have life experience. And it's just, in many countries around the world, the concept of incarcerating young people is unfathomable. And I'm wondering how you fold in storytelling and narrative around young people in the work that you do with Youth Justice Network.
Yeah, this comes up a lot, and I always say that we honor Malcolm X as a legend in our culture, but he wasn't always Malcolm X. I don't know if you know his story, but he was a guy that was under the title of Detroit Red before that. Right? And so he also had a criminal justice background. He also had a background in the streets that wasn't the healthiest. And he probably was a guy that most people would rather not stand next to, and it required intervention to support Malcolm. It required folks who cared enough to return even after he initially rejected their support, and to be consistent and to have a continuum to say, hey, we're going to go back to him again and again until he welcomes the support and the resources and everything that we're attempting to bring to the forefront to transform, to do the mental and spiritual transformation that was needed for Malcolm at that time. Same for all of our young people, who, whether you grew up in the streets of New York City, Atlanta, California, were born into conditions that we're held accountable for, but we did not create, right? So I think as a society, when adults start taking the accountability for these realities and stop blaming young people for reacting to the realities, the crimes are the reaction, right? But what they teach us in mathematics is if we want to solve a problem, we have to go to the root of the problem. And so the root is really the intergenerational disparities around the resources, around the inequitable realities that our communities have had to undergo. And this is intergenerational, but this is also mental as much as it is economic, right? And so we have to look at this in terms of the mental and emotional impact that it has had upon community, where a lot of the decisions and crimes aren't being initiated from a healthy mindset. A lot of times these things are derived from communities that have been so impacted that many of them are operating from a space of imbalanced rationale mentally. On top of that, many of our youth are still developing mentally. They said the brain isn't fully developed until the age of 26, right? So when we're looking at children who are still maturing, many of whom lack infrastructure as it relates to guidance, as it relates to having a two-parent home, as it relates to having a stabilized home. I'll just give you an example. I was playing basketball with a young man at the jail in Maryland. This must have been about 15 years ago, right? And we're playing basketball at the jail. And, in basketball, we talk a little trash. And I'm telling him, I said, oh, man, you can't keep up with me. And And I laugh, and he looks at me, he says, Messiah, I got a bad back, man. He's 17 years old, right? He's in the jail telling me this. He said, I've been sleeping on other people's floors for the last few years, which means this young person doesn't have a bed to lay on, right? He's sleeping on other people's floors every night, and every night determining or having to find out what floor is going to be the floor of the night, right? So this is oftentimes the reality, and we don't peel back the layers because it's uncomfortable for us as a society, right? It requires us having to take accountability. It requires us having to realize that our investments weren't properly prioritized, and that many of our investments were based on greed, on personal want, and not the macro support of society at large. Many of our investments have been very much selfish, based on where we think there's an immediate return for us, but not for our children, not for the generations to come, especially those who are the children of slaves and have really done the infrastructure work to build America and are the backs that we stand on. So this is really a conversation, and I appreciate you asking this question, but I think it's a conversation that is very layered, you know?
Finally, Messiah, how can people get in touch with you if they want to support the work that you're doing or just find out more?
And as it relates to us, we're at youthjustice.org. Folks can connect with us on Instagram at youthjustice_network. youthjustice_network. Our website is youthjustice.org. And yeah, feel free to reach out to us. We're always welcoming volunteers.
Thank you so much, Messiah, for joining us today, and best of luck to you.
Thank you for having us, and we appreciate the exchange.
My guest has been MessiahRamkissoon, Deputy Executive Director at Youth Justice Network, a nonprofit in New York City supporting 16 to 24-year-olds affected by Rikers Island and other detention facilities. This is Rising Up for Justice, and I'm SonaliKolhatkar, host and executive producer of this new weekly half-hour series exclusive to viewers of Free Speech TV and subscribers of my long-standing program, Rising Up with Sonali. You can find out more at risingupwithsonali.com.